Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, Uganda orders a social media shutdown as tensions ratchet up ahead of Thursday's vote. 11 candidates are vying for the top job. Security is beefed up in the capital after a violent campaign. Also, France condemns the killing of over half a dozen people in a village in Cameroon. The army's denied accusations from some locals who say that soldiers were responsible for the massacre. And not so hot cocoa. A fall-off in global demand for the beans has led to a pile-up in Ivory Coast's ports. It's the world's top cacao producer, but around 100,000 tons of unsold stock have stacked up. But first, Uganda's heading into the final stretch for elections after a tense run-up to Thursday's presidential and parliamentary polls. The country hasn't seen a peaceful transfer of power since 1962, and there's a lot riding on the vote as it struggles to shake off the economic drag of the pandemic. Karis Garland tells us more about a nation at a crossroads.
Dotted with lakes and surrounded by mountains and valleys, Uganda is a landlocked nation in East Africa. It's home to more than 45 million people from a large variety of ethnic groups. The population is increasingly urban and educated, but also overwhelmingly young, with roughly half less than 15 years old. Uganda has one of the highest refugee populations worldwide, hosting some 1.4 million people from surrounding countries. Agriculture accounts for a large share of the country's exports, GDP, and provides the main source of income for the vast majority of people. The World Bank says the sector has helped Uganda reduce poverty over the past decades, but Covid-19 has significantly worsened the effects of poverty and slowed the country's overall economic growth. Uganda became independent from the UK in 1962. Since then, it has endured a military coup, a brutal dictatorship, disputed elections and a 5-year war that brought current President Yoweri Museveni to power in 1986. Museveni is vying for another term in the 2021 general election, where 18.1 million registered voters will choose between him and 10 other candidates for the top job, as well as 353 MPs. Deteriorating human rights remains a concern for the UN and other watchdogs, who have urged a free and peaceful vote after a deadly election campaign.
Now, France has condemned the killing of over half a dozen people in a village in Cameroon over the weekend. The army has denied accusations that soldiers were responsible for the massacre. Regina Sondo has more.
At least 9 civilians were reportedly killed and almost a dozen injured in a farming community in the southwest region of Cameroon. Now, witnesses say on Sunday, men dressed in military uniforms stormed Mautu village, which is on the Boyakumba highway, and opened fire indiscriminately on inhabitants there. Children and women were equally killed in the attack. Now, the recent targeting on civilians have drawn international condemnation, equally national condemnation, and put a spotlight on the search for peace in Cameroon as the country wrestles on an insurgency from English-speaking separatist fighters. Now the French embassy here in Cameroon has condemned the attack and called for an investigation. They've equally condemned the indiscriminate use of violence on civilians. The Cameroonian military has said they are not responsible for civilian killings in Mautu village, saying images circulating on social media were fabricated by terrorist groups to lay blame on defense forces in Cameroon on the massacre in Mautu village. Rights groups in Cameroon have condemned the attack and accused both the military and separatist fighters in Cameroon for violating human rights in these recent attacks that have been recorded in just the first 10 days of January this year.
Regina Sondo there for us. Now, Malawi's declared a state of disaster after 2 senior cabinet ministers and 2 other prominent political figures have died of COVID-19. The country is facing a spike in infections. Local government minister Lingson Berekanyama and Transport Minister Sidik Mia both passed away early Tuesday. Mia had been tipped as a possible successor to current President Lazarus Chakwera. He's called the deaths an incalculable loss. Jane Flanagan has more.
President Chikwera of Malawi has imposed a state of emergency just hours after 2 of his cabinet ministers died from COVID-19. In recent weeks, 2 other senior officials have died from the virus, and Malawi has seen a massive spike in infections. The president blamed the rise in the caseload on a relaxed attitude towards the threat over the festive season, and also because of the large number of Malawians returning home from jobs in South Africa. South Africa is carrying the largest number of infections on the continent. The president also confirmed that just before Christmas, he hosted 32 members of his cabinet in his office for a meeting, and the following day, one of his ministers confirmed he had tested positive for COVID-19. The president has admitted that he has been among the millions of Malawians who've let their guard down over the festive season after pictures emerged of him hosting the singer Madonna in his office at State House, in which neither of them were wearing masks. They were standing in close proximity and sharing handshakes and hugs, which is in breach of the protocols that President Chikwera himself has imposed on the rest of Malawi.
Now, with more than 30,000 deaths and more than 1 million COVID infections, South Africa is the country on the continent that's been hit the hardest by the pandemic. The government hopes to vaccinate 70% of the population by the end of the year, prioritising at-risk groups, and that includes those South Africans classified as being obese. Our correspondent reports.
The average South African is obese. A third of men and 2/3 of women in the country are overweight. Those falling into these categories have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19, and researchers are exploring why. At the University of Pretoria, this professor explained to us that being overweight can damage the immune system, making it not only easier to catch COVID-19, but also much harder to recover.
People with obesity were 2 times more likely to be admitted to hospital because of the severity of their disease than people that were not obese. And they also found that there was a 50% higher probability of mortality.
Diabetes and hypertension, conditions linked to obesity, are also risk factors. South Africa's overweight and obese are now being prioritised for COVID vaccination as a vulnerable group.
All of us have a sense of personal anxiety, where we now wish to know at which point can we say we are, safe.
South Africa's obese have struggled to lose weight during lockdown. On the contrary, most gained weight in 2020, according to a new study led by a giant of the country's food industry. Eating habits for many have taken a turn for the worse.
We were able to map out exactly what people were eating more of, less of, and what we found is that salt, people were having far more salt intake than is recommended, and snacking. What was surprising for me particularly was the portion sizes. What people felt was a normal, healthy portion was far too large.
Obesity is a public health issue. Seriously addressing it could help in the fight against COVID-19.
Now, a fall-off in global demand for cocoa has led to a pile-up of beans in Ivory Coast's ports. It's the world's top producer, but around 100,000 tonnes of unsold stock has stacked up in the bush. That's had the knock-on effect of having slowed down the mid-December main harvest. Laurent Berstecker has more.
Thousands of tons of cacao wasting away in warehouses and containers. In Ivory Coast, the chocolate industry is bearing the brunt of a global economic slowdown caused by the pandemic. For the past few months, cacao farmers there have found it nearly impossible to sell their products.
On a vu des élèves qui traînaient parce que les parents n'ont pas eu l'acheter pour acheter le cacao. Donc du coup, n'ont pas l'argent pour envoyer leurs enfants à l'école.
Several Ivorian cacao exporters say that major US and European chocolate makers recently asked to postpone deliveries by 3 months, citing reduced global demand. In addition, a minimum purchasing price of 1,000 CFA francs a kilo, set by Ivorian authorities in October to help lift producers out of poverty, may now be having the opposite effect.
Notre position ici est dit et ne peut pas payer à nous 1 000 francs et s'en va revendre à Liban 1 000 francs. Donc, puisque si ils peuvent payer à nous au moins 900 ou 950.
Since 2019, Ivory Coast and Ghana, the world's 2 biggest cacao producers, have issued a series of joint measures to help support local farmers. But these have so far had a limited impact on the $100 billion industry, where only 6% of all wealth trickles down to farmers and growers.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa for now. Thanks for joining, and do so again if you can. Take care.